Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our very first classroom session at JigSpace. Now, my name's Maddie, and I'm part of the Jig Studio team. We run customer training as well as client services. And essentially, JigSpace and our Jig Workshop are designed to be extremely easy to use and to give you the ability to make stunning 3D presentations in a matter of minutes. This session today is going to walk you through all the basic tools and features within our Jig Workshop, and you should be ready to create your very own jigs by the end of this class. Now, I'll stop talking in a second because the bulk of this session is going to be run by our very talented Laura, and she is a 3D artist and a jig expert, and also one of the very first JigSpace employees, so you are in very good hands. But before she begins, I just wanted to show you our download page here that you can see on the screen. You're most likely familiar with our website by now as you're watching this session, but if you click the download button at the top, you'll be led to this page, which gives you the ability to download JigSpace for any device. In addition to our download page, I also just wanted to quickly show you our Jig dashboard. So our dashboard is an online resource. You can access it via the app, but you can also simply Google it by writing dashboard.jig.space. And essentially, our dashboard is an online resource and it gives you more comprehensive functionality, particularly with respect to sharing settings, privacy settings, team sharing settings. All of that is accessed via our Jig dashboard. So you can see all the tabs on the left-hand side of the screen will take you to different functionalities with respect to what I've just mentioned. And then by clicking on one of the thumbnails of your jigs, you also have the ability here to share that specific jig with your team, make it public. You can also make copies of jigs and transfer ownership so that certain team members can have private ownership of specific jigs. So all of this ability and functionality can be accessed via our dashboard. Now I will pass it over to Laura, who will begin this lesson in the JigSpace app in our Explore tab.
In this class today, we'll be exploring how to create a demo jig. So to start off with, I'm going to select New Jig. Now, as you can see, we're in the Jig Workshop and we're inside a 3D scene. So to move around, I'm pressing and holding down on the right mouse button, and that allows me to rotate in the scene. And to pan myself around the scene, I'm pressing the middle mouse button. And these basic controls will just let you navigate around the Jig Workshop scene. And in the center of the world, you can see that we have these guidelines. These guide you as to where the center of the world is, and they also show you where you should try and keep your models within the scene. So for the focus of things, we try to keep them in the center, but we also try to keep our models from straying too far outside of the edges of this guide. This is just so that when you load your objects into AR mode or in augmented reality using a phone or an iPad, when they load up, they're in the center of the device or your phone. Now to start off with, we need to bring our first object into the scene. So to do that, I'm going to go to the left-hand side and open up the model library. And as you can see, we've got a wide range of different models. All of these can be interacted with in the Jig Workshop. We also have a large number of different categories. So you can scroll through and select the model to create your jig from what we already have available here. You could also go to websites like TurboSquid or GrabCAD and purchase some models there. But in this case, we're going to start off with one of our own models. So as you can see, our model is loaded into the scene, and on the right-hand side, we have the Jig toolbar. This contains a number of tools that allow you to move and interact with your objects in the scene. Right now, we're on the Move tool. We also have the Rotate, Scale, Color, which allows you to change color, transparency, as well as the materials or textures on your model. We also have Spin, If I turn this on, I can add spin to many objects within our scene. This can be especially useful for things like propellers or cogwheels. We also have labels. If we use the names from files, this can be great if you have a CAD file with all of your parts pre-labeled inside the file data, and this will let you bring them straight into the scene. But if you bring in a file and you find that the labels are not correct, we have the ability to clear all the labels and you can start from scratch. We also have the duplicate tool. I'll be demonstrating this now as we don't use it later in the class. So with the model selected, and if I've selected the duplicate tool and I click in the scene, I can create an exact replica of the model we had initially selected. So this is especially useful if you have a model fully textured, fully labeled, and you want to make an exact replica of that model. You just need to click in the scene. And this is useful for if you want to show minor differences, for example, different brand colors and variations within the same model. And it's a great way to quickly populate your scene. And the final tool in the toolbar is the delete button. I'm going to remove this duplicate from the scene. So we have our model in the scene. One of the first things we do when we bring a model into Jig is we give it its materials and its colors. So I'm going to zoom in using the scroll wheel and select my model. And going to the color palette tool, I'm going to go to materials and select a material. In this case, I'm going to select a rough plastic and give it a dark black color. So our material is on. Next, I'm going to start selecting the sub-objects and give them their materials. So if I select my models and click up here to go into sub-object mode, as you can see, that just allows me to select the individual parts that make up the model. So in this case, I'm going to select this piece and I'm pressing Shift to multi-select, and I'm going to select these outer casings and give them their own material. In this case, a white shiny plastic. So as you can see, the model is already much clearer. Adding the color has helped define the different parts of it. And I'm going to add in more materials. Just a couple of the trim pieces, I'd like them to be a metal material. Okay, now that the exterior is fully colored, the next thing I want to do is select the internal components and give them their materials as well. So your first instinct may be to select the object and use the transform tool to move it out of the way. But when you do this, it isn't always easy for you to perfectly align it back to its initial position. So as you can see, there's a seam in the middle of the model. So in order to prevent this, I'm going to press Ctrl-Z. I can also use the bottom left-hand corner's undo redo tools, but in this case, I'm going to press Ctrl-Z and just get that model back in its initial position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another step. It's now on step 1, the initial position is saved, and on step 2, if I pull this model out, I can still go back to step 1 and still have that position recorded. And I can copy this information from step 1 to step 2. So I'm going to delete this step for now and start again from scratch. Now on step 2 is where I'm going to pull this model out. So what I'm going to keep in mind is that I have a couple of other objects in the scene that I'd also like to move aside. In this case, I'm going to select an object and press Shift Select. This will allow me to multi-select different objects. And while holding down Shift, if I click on them again, I can remove them from my selection. Another way of doing this is you can use the multi-select menu at the bottom of the toolbar. So once I click this, I'm in the multi-select menu, and any objects I click automatically get added to my selection. And I can remove them by clicking on them again. We also have a couple of other tools here. We have lock selection, select all, we have lasso select, and we also have a lasso deselect tool. So these are quite useful when working with multiple objects. So I'm going to select the outward exterior pieces and confirm my selection. And now I'm going to move them aside using the Move tool. And as you can see, everything's moved across together. I'm also going to move this internal barrel out of the way, just so I can see these pieces underneath. And I'm going to finish adding in my materials. So for these bits of wire, I want them to be a warm copper colour. Just to distinguish between the two pieces of wire, I'm going to give them a red and a blue. Now, once I've added a material, something to keep in mind is I can also change its colour. In this case, I'm going to make this wire a soft brass colour. Another fun tool in the toolbar is that we have the colour picker tool. I can use this eyedrop and it allows me to copy both the material and colour of another object. So if you watch these little bolts down here and I select the wire, they get the exact same material as well as the colour. And that can be a great way to speed up the jig texturing process. Okay, now that we have our objects fully coloured and with their materials, the next thing I want to do is I want to go back to step 1 and I want to copy this position across to step 2. So in order to do this on step 2, I'm going to use the multi-select menu and then I'll select the lasso select tool. And I'm just drawing a loop around my objects to select everything and press the tick to confirm selection. Now when I go to step 1 and I press and hold on the Move tool, I can open up the Replicate menu. So this is one of our most powerful tools in the Jig Workshop. Any attribute that I select while in this toolbar, for example, rotate, scale and color, can be copied across from one step to another. In this case, I just want to copy across the position from step 1 to step 2. So I'm applying that forward one step, and as you can see, it's been applied to the next step. So if I go back to step 2, we now have everything on this step fully coloured, and we also have it correctly positioned. You can see those materials when I step inside, and the object is fully joined with no seams. So with this as a great base step, I'm going to press and hold step 1 and press the delete to remove it. Now step 2 has become our new step 1. Now at this stage of the creation process, with your model perfectly textured with the colours and materials, it can be a great time for you to save this out as a base file for future projects. So this would allow you to be able to make multiples of similar jigs using this model with the exact same materials, which can be a great way of ensuring consistency amongst different projects. So in order to do this, I'm going to go to the left-hand side and open up the Details panel. And in here, I'm going to type in the jig's name. It's also a good idea to take a thumbnail picture. This will be the image that you see in the the Create section of the JigSpace app. So adding a picture can just help people at a glance see what the jig is going to be about and which models are contained inside it. So you can move around this scene and I'm going to get a nice dynamic shot of the hairdryer. And these two details have been filled, so I'm going to press save. And now if I scroll down the details panel, I can make a copy of this jig. Now the copy that I make will be the one that I continue on with. So in this case, I'm going to change the name from base to demo, because that's what we'll be making today. And with that done, I'm going to press save and I'm going to begin making my jig. So the first thing that we want to do when making a new jig is that we take into consideration that step 1 is the first thing people will be opening up. So we want to add in some introductory text. This text will just cover what the jig is going to be about. Now on step 2, I want to follow through and discuss the internal components that I mentioned on step 1. So what I'm going to do at the beginning is I'm going to pull out this outer casing and reveal those internal components. To do that, I'm pressing Shift in order to multi-select these external pieces. And I'm also keeping in mind these little dots, which I'd like to move out of the way as well. And with everything selected, I'm going to select the Move tool and pull these objects out of the way. I'd also like to have this barrel out of the way as well, so that I can see those little internal components here. Now with these out of the way, I'm going to the multi-select menu and I'm going to use the lasso select tool to select these as a group. And then if I go to color, I can use this hide button to turn on transparency. Now when I go from step 1 to step 2, I get a nice smooth transitional fade out of those objects. Now on step 2, because I want to start by discussing how the hairdryer works, I'm going to focus on the intake fan. So what I want to do is give this object a label as it's the focus of this step. And I'm turning that label on now. And now with that label on, it'll just be visible on step 2. I also want to give this intake fan some spin. Something to keep in mind when working with fans is the leading edge of the fan blade. So in this situation, it looks like it's pushing the air forwards. So I want this to spin back the other way so that it draws the air in. I can also type in a value here if I want it to spin a bit faster. Now when I click off the fan object, as you can see, it stops. The spin is still present in the scene, but we don't have it spinning all the time unless selected. This is in order for you to be able to select things that are hidden behind the object. For instance, if you had a lot of cogwheels spinning in the scene together, it would be very hard to select something just behind them. So that's why we have it turned off unless you have the object selected. With the intake fan spinning and with it clearly labelled, I'd also like to show the air flowing into the hairdryer. In order to do this, I'm going to add an effects object. If I go to the model library and I select the effects category, as you can see, we have a number of different effects. For this case, I'm going to select the flow cone in. And now that we have this new object in the scene, I'm going to apply it to all of my steps. We consider this best practice so that later on in a jig, if you decide you want to add in different movements and transitions in the scene, the object is available on every step. So if I now go from step 2 to step 1, we have this object in the step and it's editable. So while in step 2, I'm going to position it at the entry point of the hairdryer. And to do that, I'm using the Move tool. And now while rotating the object, I'm going to press down Shift, This will allow me to snap my rotations by 15 degrees, and it can be a great way of achieving a 90-degree turn on your objects. This can be great for some components when they're designed in a different program and haven't been positioned to match up with your objects. It means that they're much easier to align to each other. So with this at the rear of the hairdryer, I'm also going to change its colour to a soft blue, just so you can see that it's cool air that's blowing into the hairdryer. So now that it's positioned in step 2, you'll find that it hasn't been changed on step 1. As you can see, it's back where it had initially loaded. So what I want to do is go to step 2 and press and hold in the toolbar to open up the replicate menu. And I'm going to copy its position, rotation, scale, and color. And I'm going to copy those across to the previous step. While on step 1, I'm going to hide it and turn on its transparency. And now when I go from step 1 to step 2, I get a nice fade in of this effects object, as well as a fade out of that external casing. And on step 2, what I'm going to do next is add in the descriptive text of what's happening in the scene. And for my next scene, I'm going to add another step. And now on step 3, I want to show the air being heated up by these pieces at the front of the hairdryer. So what I want to do is I want to remove a bit of the distractions that are happening on the right-hand side of the screen. These are no longer the focus and they're drawing a bit too much attention. So I'm going to select the flow object and go to color and hide this visibility. I'm also going to select the intake fan and turn off its label. Now I'm going to focus on these front components. So the main focus of this step will be the nichrome wire. So I'll give that a label and turn the label on. Now another part of this step is that I want to show that the air is being heated up. So to do that, it's the nichrome wire that heats up that air. So I'm going to select the nichrome wire and give it a warm red color. I'll also select the mica plating and give it a warmer color as well. And now when I go from step 2 to step 3, you can see that this fades into a soft warm red. With that part done, I also want to show the air coming out the other end, and I want to show that it's been warmed up. So to do that, I'm going to bring in another effects object. I'll select the flow cone out this time. And again, I'm replicating this object across all of my steps so that I can edit it later if I decide to. Now I'm going to position this at the end of the hairdryer. And again, I'm pressing Shift to snap my rotations. Now I'm conscious of the fact that the nozzle narrows at the end of the hairdryer, so I'm also going to snap the scale and draw it in. And position it right at the nozzle front. And I'd also like to show that the air is heating up, so I'm going to give it a soft red color as well. So I'm going to add in the descriptive text for step 3. Now I'm going to step through and have a look at my 3 steps so far. I'm conscious of the fact that I haven't copied these across, so I think the air flow effect is going to move back to its initial position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to step 3 and select this object, press and hold to open the replicate menu. And now I'm going to select my movement or position, the rotation, the scale and color. And I'm going to copy those across to all of my previous steps. Now on step 2, I'm going to select the color palette and hide to turn on transparency. I'm going to copy this across just to the previous step. So now if I step through from 1 to 3, I think I'll have nice smooth transitions. Now I'm pretty happy with this. The next thing I'd like to do is show the hairdryer fully enclosed, but while turned on as well. So to do this, I'm going to select step 1 and add a new step. And as you can see, it's an exact duplicate of step 1. Now on this step, because I've replicated my object from step 3, this flow object here, and step 2 onto all of my steps, these objects are still present in all 4 of the steps, and I can select them here and turn off their transparency to make them fully visible. And you can see the flow of the air moving through the hairdryer. So the next thing I'm going to do to demonstrate that the hairdryer is turned on is move its switch from the off to the on position. So I'm going to lift that up. I'm also going to make a couple of these objects appear to glow, as though they have backlighting. I'll select these bars and these dots here. And in the color palette, I'm going to go to materials and scroll down to the unlit material. This means that it isn't affected by lighting or shadows in the scene, and it will be as bright as that color can possibly be. So if I go to color and I crank up to the brightest white, you can see that it looks as though it's turned on. Now when I go from step 1 to step 4, you can see that it looks like the hairdryer is turning itself on. Now another thing that I want to add in to add some more realism is to add a sound effect to my scene. So if I go down to the instructions panel here, you can see that I have the ability to record as well as add in sound effects. If I hit the record button and I speak into a microphone, I'll be able to save that recording on this step. So it's a great way of adding in further information or instructions to the step. In this case, I'm just going to add in a sound effect. Now when I press the play button, as you can hear the hairdryer sound effect, I can press pause to stop it, and I can also remove it by pressing the delete button and choose a different sound effect. Now, as you can see, we've had some recent updates to the Jig Workshop. One of the features that we've improved upon is the ability for you to upload images and videos into your Jig. So if I go to step 1 and I add a new step, this will just create a nice clean step for me to upload that video. And if I go to what used to be the model library and click this plus button, you can see that I now have some other options. So I can add in my own CAD files, or I could open up the model library like usual, or I could bring in an image or video. Now, images are a great way for you to bring in more data into your Jig. You could add things like part guides, graphs, and images of your model and other forms of media that you already have into your Jig. In this case, I'm going to bring in a video file. Now we've got our file in the scene. While I usually recommend that you replicate new models in the scene across all your steps, I'm going to say that it's best not to do that with a video file. That's just because the video file also contains sound effects and any music or audio that was a part of that video. And I have music in this one. So if I want to make sure that it isn't playing on step 4 and anything further, for example, step 4 has my hairdryer sound effect, and I might not want those audios to conflict with each other. So if I want this to just play on step 5, I just click on. And as you can see, the replicate tool is gone. And if I go to step 4, this file is no longer in the scene. So with my file in the scene on step 5, I'm going to position this behind the hairdryer as a backing board. So I'm just moving it into position, rotating it a bit. I'll scale it up. Now, as you can see, the video file is white in this scene. That's because the first frame of the video is white. Often when you bring in videos into the Jig Workshop, it'll be black, and that's because the first frame is black. Now, the video plays correctly when viewed in flat mode or in AR mode, but we don't have the video playing in the scene during edit mode. So with this positioned as I want it in the scene, and with all my other steps looking pretty good, I'm going to go to step 1, and I'm going to view this jig in AR mode. And as you can see, we've got our hairdryer model in the scene. If I zoom in, you can see that the intake fan is spinning and we've got our flow effect into the hairdryer. I go to step 3. We have the warm wires and the hot air coming out the other end. And now, as you can hear, we've got our hairdryer sound effect playing. As you can see, I can play it again by pressing the play button. I can also pause it by clicking on the speaker here. And if I go to step 5, we have our hairdryer and the video file in our scene. And as you can hear, we've got audio and the music that comes from the video file too. And this object works just like any other object in the scene. You can even step behind it. And so that's our jig so far. So with the jig fully complete, the next thing I want to do is finish off adding in its details and save it out. So I'm going to the left-hand details panel and I'm going to scroll up and add in a description. It can also be a great idea to add in a date. This will help you know which is the latest version of the jig, and the creator's name. This will just mean that it's easy for you to track down who created the jig so that they can make any necessary changes. Tags are a great way for refining your searches in the Create tab of the JigSpace app. If I add in hairdryer, it'll just make it easier to search for this one. I could also add in a part number, and that will help you understand which of the models contain which parts in case there are any updates. Now we have our thumbnail from the initial model, but it no longer reflects the main focus of this jig, which is the internal components. So I'm going to change which thumbnail I use. So clicking back into our scene, I'm going to select step 3. This shows the hot air inside our hairdryer, and I'm going to use this as our new thumbnail image. It's good to create a new thumbnail image so that you can differentiate between this one and the demo file that we saved out earlier. And now we have a couple of other tools. We have our presentation options. Here you can change the background color of your jig. This can be a great option for when you have a model with lots of very small white or silver pieces in the scene. If you select a black background, these will contrast against that quite well. You can also select a color that matches your product's branding. It's up to you. In this case, I'm just going to keep it white for now. We also have autoplay steps. And when I select this, it opens up more menu items. Now, when you autoplay steps, you can select the time it takes to play each step. I would recommend that you find which step has the longest instructions or text in it, and you time yourself reading that. And then you can use that time as the time for the text to play, because you want to make sure that everyone has the ability to fully read your text before it moves to the next step. You can also add looping to your jig. This will just mean that when you hit the final step, it'll loop back to step 1 and continue through the jig. In this case, I'm just going to leave it off for now. And now we have our sharing jigs. If you want to share a jig link, it's important to make that jig link public. This means that you can share it amongst employees or stakeholders of this jig, and they can have a look at it. And if you need to make it private later, you can just select it again and switch it back to private. And then those links will no longer be active. But now I'm just going to leave it on. And then you can copy this link and it will allow you to share jigs via email or any other media. When people click on the link, and if they have the app installed, it will automatically load them straight into the jig. If they don't have the app installed, it'll take them to our download page where they can download the app, and once they click on it again, it'll load straight into the jig. And one of our final options is team access. So this can be a great option if you're working within a company account and you want other people in that company to be able to view and review your jigs. By clicking this and selecting OK, anyone that opens up the JigSpace app from your team and logs into their account will be able to see this jig in their team jig section. So with all of this complete, I'm going to press save and I'm going to go back into the main menu. And now, as you can see, we have our two jigs here, both the base model and the demo jig. And if I go to Team Jigs, you can see that the hairdryer demo jig has loaded into the Team Jig section. So next I'm going to select this and click into its details. And as you can see here, I can create a QR code of this jig. So using this image and saving it out, I'll be able to add this to any form of media that I have. I can add it to pamphlets or instruction manuals, and people will be able to load up my jig and learn more about our new product, or they'll be able to step by step work their way through a repair or service manual.
Thank you so much for that, Laura. And I've actually just scanned that QR code on my phone, and I just wanted to show you guys what a jig looks like in augmented reality, because obviously augmented reality and having the ability to view these jigs in one's own environment is one of our most powerful tools at JigSpace. If you were creating a product demonstration, customers being able to see this product in their own environment is extremely important. But we also have a lot of customers using jigs for training, for sales, for prototyping, and essentially anything where 3D visualization is key to achieving a purpose. And we've also just launched Web Viewer and App Clips, which means that you no longer need the JigSpace app downloaded on your device to be able to view jigs. Essentially, they're available for any device. And lastly, I wanted to give you a quick overview of the Jig dashboard. Our dashboard is an online resource. You can access it via the app, but you can also simply Google it by writing dashboard.jig.space. And essentially, our dashboard is an online resource and it gives you more comprehensive functionality, particularly with respect to sharing settings, privacy settings, team sharing settings. All of that is accessed via our Jig dashboard. So you can see all the tabs on the left-hand side of the screen will take you to different functionalities with respect to what I've just mentioned. And then by clicking on one of the thumbnails of your jigs, you also have the ability here to share that specific jig with your team, make it public. You can also make copies of jigs and transfer ownership so that certain team members can have private ownership of specific jigs. So all of this ability and functionality can be accessed via our dashboard. So that brings us to the end of this first classroom session. Now, we hope everyone enjoyed it, and we hope you also learnt a lot and you feel a lot more confident using JigSpace now. Before you leave, I just wanted to bring your attention to some of the resources that we'll have on this webpage. So we will have documentation, which will include all the features and tools that we learnt in this lesson today. If you enjoy reading rather than watching, we'll also have a link to the jig so that you can watch it back and see the jig that Laura created in this class today. We'll also have a 3D model, a sound file, and a video file. Now, all of these will be the files that Laura used to create this jig today. And the reason we've uploaded them is so that you can go back and attempt to create this jig yourself and actually put the skills you've learnt today to practice. If you struggle with that, we'll also have a link for you to ask any questions or give us any feedback, and also a link to book a one-on-one session with someone from our team if you're looking to go a bit deeper into JigSpace. So that is the end of our session today. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy using JigSpace.